Attacking a castle was a difficult task for any army, but attacking forces came up with a multitude of ways to bring down castle defenses and attack those within. One of the lesser-known methods to achieve this was called undermining or sapping, where the invaders would tunnel through the ground and use wooden foundations to shore up a space underneath the walls or tower. They would place kindling around the area and then ignite it at the right moment to collapse part of the structure and pour through the breach, surprising those inside. As castle designs became more sophisticated and advanced, it became harder and harder to break through the walls using conventional methods, and so many forces turned to sapping. Despite obstacles like strong foundations set into the bedrock that made breaking through the stone even harder, there was no way to fully prevent sapping, meaning it continued to be used throughout medieval times and even beyond. In fact, tunnel warfare can be traced from antiquity to as recently as the 2 World Wars. Although after medieval times the use of sapping decreased, it still remained a viable warfare tactic. Once gunpowder was introduced to the Western world, sapping became more destructive and effective, as opposing forces were able to use artillery to create larger breaches. They could also just use the gunpowder itself, filling up underneath places they wanted to destroy and igniting a long fuse into the tunnel under the fortification. One blast later, big swaths of the castle wall could be blown apart for easier access, so that the attacking troops could storm the breach. However, as time passed, so too did our ability to prevent sapping, and it eventually became more trouble than it was worth in a lot of instances. Moats made the process harder, and later, strong earthwork foundations absorbed the shock of explosions, making it harder to break down the castle walls. Tunnel systems became more advanced from both inside and outside the castle, with troops often stationed underground to prevent any attempts at undermining. In the countryside, the rumblings of rebellion grow louder. Bells toll for vengeance as the nation teeters on the edge of chaos. Welcome to today's sponsor, Bellwright, a single-player or co-op open-world medieval strategy survival game. In Bellwright, you step into the medieval shoes of a character whose life was shattered in childhood. Framed for the assassination of the crown prince, you were forced to flee the country, saved only by a loyal family friend. Now, years later, that friend has been mysteriously killed. It's time to return home, uncover the truth, and bring justice to a land ruled by corruption. Built with the stunning Unreal Engine 5, Bellwright offers a sprawling open world. Start from humble beginnings in a small settlement and rise to become the leader of a rebellion. Face threats across various regions, gain renown, and gather resources to advance your technologies and strengthen your cause. Recruit companions to help complete quests, or assign them tasks to build, craft, and hunt, expanding your settlement into a thriving stronghold. Bellwright is now available in early access on Steam. Click the link in the description to learn more and start your journey. One of the first examples of sapping, however, were on far humbler, older structures. As far back as 4,000 years ago, in some of the oldest records of civilization we have, there's evidence of soldiers undermining enemy city walls. During the time of Caesar, at the siege of Axella Udunum, the Romans used tunnels to block off their enemies' only water supply, causing the Gauls to surrender. A likely instance of ancient chemical warfare appeared during the sapping of the city of Dura Europo. In 256 CE, when an early Iranian or Persian dynasty known as the Sasanians attacked a Roman-held stronghold. The siege began with the Sasanians launching an assault on the city's vulnerable western wall around Tower 19. Their intent, it's believed, was to sap 15 meters of curtain wall around the tower, just north of the Pomerine Gate, and breach the walls. To accomplish this, they first had to dig towards the walls from their own front lines, likely starting from chamber tombs of the necropolis. Punching through the softer earth, the attackers would soon have encountered limestone plateau, capping, and iron-hard stone layers that they had to breach to reach the hard floor directly under Tower 19. Later archaeological evidence shows that they sapped the whole foundation, but were only successful in removing half. Unfortunately for the invading Sasanians, though the Romans were on to their tactic. Unknown to the diggers, the Romans too were undermining, intending to counteract the work of the Sasanians and meet them underground, preventing their planned invasion. It's unclear whether the two forces actually came face to face in the tunnel, or if something else happened that caused it. But either way, remains of around 20 Roman soldiers were found during 20th century excavations of the tunnel. But regardless of the human remains, suggesting the Romans didn't fare too well in the tunnels, it's evident they did succeed in preventing the Sasanians from entering the city that way, even as they blew the tunnel. The wall in Tower 19 submerged slightly into the earth, remaining upright, though extensively damaged. Despite this, there was no break in the defenses, meaning to all intents and purposes, the Sasanians' sapping attempt had failed. They would only win the siege later through other means. While somewhat effective, sapping really didn't hit its stride until later, extensively used across the medieval period and becoming a major strategy in the attack of city walls and castles. One of the best examples and instances of sapping was at the 1215 siege of Rochester Castle during the First Barons' War. The castle was at a key strategic point, controlling entry points from Dover and Canterbury into London, and so when it was taken by rebels during the war, King John fiercely responded, successfully destroying Rochester Bridge and using 5 stone-throwing machines and bowmen. King John was already laying a heavy siege to the castle as he began sapping efforts to attack the southeast tower. On November 25th, over a month after the siege began, King John sent for his justiciar, Hubert de Burgh, to bring, quote, 40 of the fattest pigs of the sort least good for eating, with the intention of using their bacon fat to light the pits under the tower. Their plan was successful. A whole side of the keep was exposed and half collapsed, letting King John's forces seize the castle shortly after. This is just one of a few examples that took place during the First Barons' War. With rebels taking King John's strongholds, many castles fell into their hands and required breaching for the crown to reclaim. Another such instance was less than a year later, in 1216, at the siege of Dover Castle. Nicknamed the Key of England, Prince Louis, head of the rebel forces, attacked via undermining the main outer gate. He succeeded in bringing down one of the towers, fortifying it, but never actually successfully made it into the castle ground. Hubert de Burgh, who was holding the castle, managed to block the spots the explosion had damaged, preventing Louis from marching in and taking the castle for himself. Hubert's knights successfully retained their hold until King John's death later that year. That's not to say sapping died with King John's reign, as we've already established. Another example comes from 8 years later in 1224 at the siege of Bedford Castle, when the newly appointed King Henry III, son of King John, was on the throne. At the time, Bedford Castle was held by Lord Fox de Briotet, a captain of King John's who had fallen out of favor. After defying the king on multiple occasions, including refusing to give up Bedford Castle, Henry attacked the fortification. He successfully broke through the outer barbican before taking the outer bailey, coming up to the final layer of defense, the inner bailey. It's at this point Henry chose to use his miners to reach the inner keep. Using them, Henry was able to successfully attack the inner bailey and capture it before moving on to the keep itself. On August 14th, 1224, they set off the explosion beneath the keep, and the towers sank to below the ground. As giant cracks appeared in its stonework, it became clear Bedford Castle was lost to de Breautet. By the next morning, the castle's occupants had surrendered, and its leaders were hanged. De Breautet threw himself to Henry's mercy 5 days later and was exiled. Undermining and sapping continued to evolve, used as a key strategy in medieval sieges, and later resurfacing as an effective tactic during trench warfare of World War I, and within the jungles during Vietnam. The British, French, and Germans all employed mining as a part of their strategy to attack enemy lines. This is particularly evident in places like Ypres, where hundreds of tunnels were used, and fights to the death often broke out underground when miners from opposing sides met. Except now machinery and artillery was more advanced, so alongside mining and explosions, chemical warfare like sending poison gas down the tunnels was also used as a tactic. During the Vietnam War, the Viet Cong also used tunneling as an effective weapon against American forces, hiding from overhead attacks and attacking unexpectedly until the U.S. Army discovered the extensive tunnel network. While undermining and sapping may not have the same power as it once did in ancient and medieval times, it still remains a tactic used in certain parts of the world to this day.